With the light.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming this evening. And thank you for your continued support of this State Archive Speaker Series. I'm Robin Everett, and I'd like to introduce the people that are here with us this evening. We have Sarah Davis, our State Archivist, hiding in the back. And we have Susie Taylor, one of our reference archivists, doing online technical support and online moderation for tonight's program. I have a few housekeeping items for you. Please be certain to sign in. If you haven't signed in, you can sign in on your way out. Please take a moment to silence your cell phones. Restrooms are in the lobby in the back by the elevator. We'll also have remote viewers for this program. For everyone online and in person, Evan will moderate questions at the end of the program. For our viewers online, your mics and video are turned off during the presentation, but you will be able to turn them on during questions. Please raise your hand using the icon at the bottom of the screen, and then Susie will call on you. Or if you prefer not to appear in the recording, you may ask your question in the chat and it will be read by Susie. This evening's speaker is Evan Green. You may recognize him as the volunteer firearms historian for the State Museum. He has featured in Firearm Fridays videos, which you can view at the State Museum's YouTube channel. Evan earned a BS degree in archaeological economics at the Colorado State University and an MA in counseling psychology from the University of Northern Colorado. He was employed by the state of Wyoming for 31 years and then worked as a project manager for a consulting engineering firm here in Cheyenne. His presentation will share his research on the life of Charlie Bristol as a bicycle racer, soldier, businessman, and war casualty, along with some information regarding the legacy of Daisy Bristol. Please be certain to check out the items in the back that we have pulled from the museum's collections on display for this evening's talk. I'm going to turn it over to Evan. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Robin. Charles Allen Bristol died by firearm suicide on October 23rd, 1927. He had been plagued with failing health for years because he contracted malaria during his service in the Philippines during the Spanish-American War. In May of 1926, his Army pension card would show that he had been declared invalid. He had lost most of his eyesight, which is a tough blow because he was a printer for most of his career. So he left his widow of 27 years, his wife of 27 years, Daisy Bristol, and she went on to become a Cheyenne icon, the Grand Lady of Cheyenne Frontier Days. And in the process, we sort of lost track of Charlie Bristol. I got involved in this bit of research because in 1968, Daisy Bristol contributed a collection of artifacts to the State Museum, most of which were involved with Charlie as a bicycle racer, a soldier, a businessman, and ultimately a war casualty. I say he's a war casualty because his service malaria contributed, I believe, to his death. So in the process of going through the edge weapons in the museum's collection as a part of my firearms work, I ran across the sword that you'll see in the back. It's a fraternal sword from the organization Ancient Order of United Workmen. There were many of these fraternal organizations, a lot of them formed by Civil War veterans after the war, to provide support to the survivors, to the widows, to the orphans. And these fraternal organizations, there were actually two lodges of the Ancient Order of United Workmen here in Cheyenne. But when I looked into the paperwork and history, the sword was incorrectly attributed to Charlie Bristol, along with all of the other stuff that came in that collection. So as I started looking into his life, I discovered that we had some things in common. He was a soldier, he was an officer, I was not. We were both in the military, and neither of us saw combat, for which I was very grateful, and I also didn't get malaria, so that's a good thing. But I got, again, interested because of his commitment to bicycles. I share that. I'm a bicycle rider. That's my main exercise. So we're going to talk tonight. I'm going to get into the genealogy a little bit and talk about the Bristols, the McCabe's, and the Lees. We're going to talk about bicycles, one of my favorite topics, the history of the bicycle, and we'll get into Charlie's bicycle career. We'll talk about the Spanish-American War. That'll be fun. Not. And we'll do a little bit on his business as a printer. So, the families. I hope this is the right one because I thought there was families, but whatever, we'll see. We'll play it. Here's mom and dad, Charlie's mom and dad. S.A. Bristol and Ellen Lee Bristol. She looks like a formidable lady, does she not? I would not want to cross Ellen. So they were schoolmates in Guilford, Connecticut, which is on Long Island Sound, northeast of Hartford. S.A., he's Samuel Allen, but he always went by S.A., was in the Civil War. He spent some time in a Confederate prison, which was not a pleasant experience. After the war, they came west as far as Kansas and started a farm. That didn't work out very well. They were plagued by drought and grasshoppers. S.A. was quoted as saying that those grasshoppers ate everything but the buildings. So Ellen went back to Connecticut. S.A. came out to Colorado, where he worked as a teamster and prospected for gold. And Ellen eventually joined him here. So they're in Colorado, and the next slide will sort of explain how they got to Cheyenne. This is Edward M. Lee, Charlie's uncle. He was the first secretary of Wyoming Territory. I'm not convinced we have the right slides.
This was the one that was on your.
Yeah, we'll do it. Because actually it was 1869. Edward M. Lee, Ellen's older brother by 2 years, was appointed Secretary of Wyoming Territory. John Campbell was appointed governor, and Joseph M. Carey was appointed U.S. Attorney. So when Lee got to Cheyenne, the first thing he did was bring the Bristols up to town and set S.A. Bristol up with a print shop and opened a newspaper. Because of his position as secretary, he gave all the printing jobs of the territorial legislature to his brother-in-law, which outraged a guy named Nathan Baker, who was the editor of a competing Cheyenne newspaper. Baker immediately launched this bitter slander against Lee, accusing him of being drunk in public and consorting with prostitutes in public. And eventually Lee was relieved of his position. But before that happened, he was one of the prime movers in the bill that gave Wyoming women the right to vote, the first organized government to do so. Lee had served in the legislature in Connecticut, introduced a similar bill there, but was unsuccessful in having it passed there, but was successful in Wyoming. Even though it's kind of a hunky story if you're familiar with it. There's a lot of strange stuff going on. And when Governor Campbell went back to New York to get married, Lee was the acting governor and signed the commission that made Esther Hobart Morris the first female justice of peace in the country. So that's Charlie's uncle. That's all the stuff I just told you. Here's Daisy's. There's Daisy's parents, John McCabe and Catherine Willett McCabe. And all the king's men and all the king's horses couldn't come up with pictures of the McCabes, but we know something about John McCabe. In the 1880 census, he was in Missouri, occupation coppersmith. By the end of that decade, he was the foreman of the tin shop for Union Pacific Railroad in North Platte, Nebraska. And I thought, tin shop, what did the, tin can't, what? But it was a sheet metal shop. So like the cladding on the engines, the cladding around the boilers over the insulation was manufactured in that shop. And in 1893, John McCabe came to Cheyenne and had that same position, foreman of the tin shop for the Union Pacific Railroad here. Daisy would have been 16 years old at that time. So there's the McCabes, and here's the happy couple. And she's a lovely, lovely young woman. Charlie looks like a thug in this picture.
I don't want to be in this picture.
So did they meet cute? We don't really know, but they were both members of the Cheyenne Bicycle Club. Charlie was one of the founding members of there were two bicycle clubs in Cheyenne at the time. Charlie was a founding member of one of those clubs in 1892. And after Charlie passed, Daisy had a career as a journalist, and she wrote an article about a moonlight bicycle ride in 1897. They rode out to a ranch, but moonlight ride with their chaperones, of course. But it rained, so they couldn't return. They spent the night at the ranch, and the boys slept in a hayloft, watched by the chaperones, I'm sure. So Daisy Bristol, I bet some of you are familiar, at least know that name. She survived 56 years after Charlie passed away. And again, ardent supporter of Cheyenne Frontier Days. She designed 5 or 6 floats that are still used in the Frontier Days parades today. She played the organ, taught the dancers how to dance on the moving floor for the parade. Again, forged a career for herself as a journalist. She was the woman's page editor of the Wyoming Stockman and Farmer. She wrote a weekly column for the local newspaper, Hitting the Shops with Daisy. Got a lot of respect for her to recover from those catastrophes. She lost her husband in October, and within 6 weeks after that, her mother passed away, and her father had been gone since 1920. So there's what I just told you. Okay, Charlie the Wheelman. We're going to talk about the history of bicycles a little bit. And Charlie the Wheelman, the guys who rode really fast were called scorchers. You had to look out for them. They'd run you off the roads. So here's 3 members of the Laramie Bicycle Club on their high wheelers. A high wheeler, there was a bicycle, the first bicycle with pedals was introduced about 1811. It's called the Bone Shaker for good reason. It was all cast iron, even the wheels. The high wheeler was introduced in the late 1870s. And they were dangerous because of that high wheel. These wheels sometimes were over 5 foot tall. So if you hit a pothole or a rock, and remember, this is the late 19th century, you'd go over those handlebars. And it was not uncommon for people to be seriously injured on these bikes. So the people who rode them were pretty much limited to athletes and people willing to take that risk. And the reason that the wheels were so big is that it was a direct drive. So every time you did a pedal stroke, it turned that big wheel. So it made you go farther and faster with a single pedal stroke. So this guy here is William Owen, Billy Owen. And he went on to be state auditor. He was a surveyor at this point in time. He went on to become state auditor and allegedly was the first documented ascent of the Grand Teton. That's in dispute. But in 1878, I don't know if it was these 3 guys, but Billy Owen and 2 of his friends rode those bicycles across Yellowstone National Park. But that was a great outing. But in 1884, guy named Thomas rode from the West Coast to the East Coast on one of these things. And when he got to the East Coast, he said, I guess I'll go right around Europe and Asia, which he did. He wrote a book called Around the World on a Bicycle. So there's things I've already told you about high wheelers. So in 1885, the safety bicycle was invented. And you can see that it had a chain drive, pedals, and that classic diamond shape. And this opened up bicycling to a lot of people. And it became a craze in the late 19th century. These were sold like wildfire. People bought them and rode them. There were schools where you could learn to ride a bicycle. So this is the bike that's in the back of the room. This is probably my favorite bike. And you can see it's in 1995. So you can see in 110 years, didn't really change much. You still got the same basic frame, wheels of equal size. So now we have bicycles with electronic shifting and hydraulic disc brakes and lots of other things, but they still would have that same basic format. This is my Go Fast bike here. It's a specialized tarmac. It's carbon fiber bike, still has rim brakes. I think it's a 12 speed. I don't use more than 3 or 4. This is on a bike path at Fort Collins. They have a really nice network of bike paths down there.
How much does that weigh?
About 22 pounds. That's without the water bottles. The water adds some weight, but about 22 pounds. And here's the Cheyenne Bicycle Club. Again, founded, Charlie was a founding member. I don't know what they're doing with all these horns, but they look like they're having a good time, don't they? So he's a founding member, 60 members, and it was one of 2 clubs. And bakers, businessmen, doctors, lawyers, men and women were all members of the Cheyenne Bicycle Club. And it disbanded in 1898 because all the guys went off to the Spanish-American War. Here's the Laramie Bicycle Club. It's not a great picture, but I really like that steam engine in the background. And Buffalo Soldiers on bicycles. Who knew? This is the 25th Infantry Bicycle Corps at Mammoth Hot Springs. And in 1897, they rode from Bozeman, Montana to St. Louis, 1,900 miles. And it was an experiment to see if bicycles could replace horses in the military. You know, my dad, I was raised on a ranch, we had horses. My dad says it's always a mistake to buy something to eat while you're sleeping. So that's horse, right? And if you do away with horseshoes and stables and put people on bicycles, you could do away with those horses. But bikes or horses, well, cars. So here they are crossing a river. Their packs weighed about 40 pounds and they were carrying a bolt action rifle. Their bicycles weighed 30 pounds, which is not all that heavy, but most of your road bikes would be in that 17 to 25 weight. Mountain bikes might be a little heavier. And of course, they were Buffalo Soldiers, so they're African Americans, except for the officers, of course. Couldn't have black officers. And basically, that dispute was solved by the invention of the automobile. 30 pounds of gear, bolt action rifle, 29 pounds. Car made it obsolete. The first military use of automobiles was in the Mexican expedition of 1916. So the bicycle had an incredible impact on women at the end of the 19th century. Before, if they wanted to leave the house, they had to have a horse or a carriage or get someone who would take them somewhere. They could buy a bicycle and go. It was really impactful. I think this is where I want to read some quotes about women and bicycles. This is Francis E. Willard, How I Learned to Ride the Bicycle, 1895. I began to feel that myself plus the bicycle equaled myself plus the world. Upon whose spinning wheel we must all learn to ride, or fall into the sluice ways of oblivion and despair. She who succeeds in gaining mastery of the bicycle will gain mastery of life. In 1896, Mary Ward published a pamphlet entitled Bicycling for Ladies and said, riding the wheel, our own powers are revealed to us. You have conquered a new world, and exultantly you take possession of it. I am delighted with my wheel. I am equally as fond of it as my horse. That was Annie Oakland. Here's Ann Strong in the Minneapolis Tribune, 1895. The bicycle is just as good company as most husbands. And when it gets old and shabby, a woman can dispose of it and get a new one without shocking the entire community. So, of course, something else that hasn't changed in the last 125 years is when women exert their freedom and independence, there's pushback. In Victoria, BC, in 1895, the police declared, quote, bloomers are not suitable for ladies' streetwear, even when worn as a bicycle costume. So you wonder, did they arrest women? It's pretty strange. So there's those quotes. The other one I like that I've used is Mark Twain said, get a bicycle. You will not regret it if you live. So here's a couple of bloomer girls riding their bicycles. I used to be a runner, and I still encounter runners when I'm out on my bicycle, and you seldom see them smile. But about 75% of the people at me riding a bicycle smile. Look at that. That's just great. Okay. This is a nice quote by Susan B. Anthony about bicycles. And I found this picture, and I went, oh, suffragettes. How cool. But what's wrong with this picture? Some of them have modern clothes, right? And here's a bicycle with a derailleur. So I have no idea when this picture was taken, but I actually put it up on my PowerPoint, and then I went, wait a minute. And everybody's smiling. Okay, now we're going to talk a little bit about Charlie and his bicycles. This is circa 1895. And in 1896, William Randolph Hearst, who we'll probably hear from again, and bicycle manufacturer E.C. Stearns organized a cross-country 3,385-mile route, 220 stages of 15 to 20 miles. Charlie rode 2 of those stages in Wyoming. From San Francisco to New York. How long do you think it took him?
58 days.
Think about the roads in 1896. They rode 24/7, day and night. 13 days and 30 minutes. San Francisco to New York. They averaged over 10 miles an hour. On my best day, I can average 10 miles an hour riding on pavement with the wind. So, just for perspective, the first car transcontinental trip was in 1903, took 63 days, but it was just 2 guys and their dog. The first plane transcontinental trip was a plane called the Vin Fizz. He was sponsored by a soft drink company that apparently sold Vin Fizz. And that was in 1911, took 49 days in a Wright EX. First, it offered $50,000 for a transcontinental flight that could be completed in 30 days. This guy didn't make it, and he reported that there wasn't much left of the airplane he started with when he got to San Francisco. He went the other way. So yeah, 13 days and 30 minutes coast to coast. Here he is finishing his ride, his section of that transcontinental ride on Cary Avenue. And look at all those people. You wouldn't get them out like that today for a guy on a bicycle. But it was a big deal at the time. So in 1903, Theodore Roosevelt came to Wyoming and went to a barbecue at the F.E. Warren Ranch. And Daisy and Charlie, they encouraged everybody to ride horses because Roosevelt had ridden, I think he changed horses 2 or 3 times, but he rode from Laramie to Cheyenne. So they didn't have a horse, they didn't have a carriage or a buggy or a 4-in-hand. So they rented a tandem bicycle and rode 13 miles out to the ranch and got there after the barbecue was over. They didn't get to meet the president and then rode back 13 miles. So 26 miles is a good ride for me. I feel good if I can do that. And I just ran across this picture because it's 2 people on a tandem bicycle, and it's Nell and Elmer Lovejoy. Well, another one of those rabbit holes you go down. Who was Elmer Lovejoy? He was a founder of the Laramie Bicycle Club. He had a bicycle shop, and in 1902, he invented, built, and drove on the streets of Laramie the first steam-powered automobile in that community. So there's Elmer Lovejoy. There's a bar and grill in Laramie called Lovejoy's that's connected in some way with it. Okay, the Spanish-American War. Fun stuff, right? So, in the late 19th century, Cuba was in the throes of the most recent revolution. The people in Cuba were trying to throw out Spanish colonizers. Spain had already lost all of their other colonies in Central and South America. The only thing they had left was Cuba, Guam, and the Philippines. And the people were trying to run them out, and the Spanish were just brutal in their repression of those revolutionaries. So McKinley, president at the time, sent the American warship, the Maine, to Havana Harbor. And there was some thought that that was a show of support for the rebels. I think it was more capitalism, because there were American interests in Cuba. They had sugarcane fields, they had sugar processing plants, and the brutal repression of the workers in those industries was handicapping the performance, or they endangered that instance, those industries. So February 15th, 1898, the Maine blew up, killed 268 soldiers, Marines, and officers on that ship. So again, our friend, William Randolph Hearst, coined the phrase, "Remember the Maine and to hell with Spain." So there was a rash of warmongering, aided and abetted by young Theodore Roosevelt, who at that time was Assistant Secretary of the Navy. So in April 23rd of 98, McKinley called for 125,000 volunteers. And that total was apportioned among states and territories. Wyoming formed an infantry brigade, a cavalry unit that was Torrey's Rough Riders, the 2nd United States Volunteer Cavalry, who didn't make it to Cuba, and the Alger Light Artillery Battery. Charlie volunteered for the cavalry. I'm sure that was the glory job, right? Everybody wanted to be a cavalryman, but was transferred to the artillery unit. And I don't know whether he volunteered for that or whether he was told to do it, but the artillery unit needed 123 enlisted men and 3 officers for a whole total of 125 before it could be mustered into federal service. So war was declared April 25th of 98. Charlie was in his artillery unit, were sent to the Presidio in San Francisco to be trained. We'll see a card that he sent to Daisy while he was there, and he signed it as a sergeant, but by the time they left training, he was a 2nd lieutenant. So they arrived in Manila on December 7th, 1898. The peace treaty was signed December 10th, 1898. So that's the reason he didn't see any combat. They did stay in the Philippines through until I think August of 1899. Depends what you call it, the Philippine-American War, Philippine Insurrection, Philippine War for Independence, started in February of 1899. The artillery unit returned and was mustered out in California in September of 1899. So this is all going to show up on the timeline. And we didn't give Philippines their independence until after World War II. So here they are at the Presidio, Charlie, Bristol, and Spill Walcott Alger Light Artillery Battery. And here's the card, and we have the actual card back there that he sent. I love it, you know. Soon for Manila. Remember the Maine, watch our smoke. Sergeant, CAB, Sergeant. Battery A. So you may see that coat back there, right? Take a close look. These are the pants that went with it. Heavy wool lined with heavy cotton. That's probably good for December in Cheyenne, December in Manila.
Or July.
Not so much.
Right.
Yeah. So this is all of these are parts of the collection that Daisy donated, Spanish flag from the Philippines. And here are the medals that were awarded to Charlie, Lieutenant Charles Bristol Battery A, Philippine Insurrection Medal, and the Spanish-American War Medal. That's the way they spelled Puerto Rico. That was apparently correct at the time. And even though it says Cuba and Puerto Rico, he only served in the Philippines. So here they are. Some speculation that this might be their wedding picture because they got married in 1900 after Charlie came back from the Philippines. And Daisy is wearing here this ribbon, Alger Aid. And that was a support group of the wives and mothers and friends of the men who were serving in the Philippines. So I know that Charles wore his uniform at the wedding, and they were chivalried by some of the men from that artillery battery after the wedding. But I kind of question it. Maybe I'd like to think it was their wedding picture, but would you wear these big old heavy gloves? I don't know. He's wearing those in that previous picture with Spill Walcott. And Daisy has this ribbon on. So was that before or after? Don't know. She's also got the crossed cannons symbol for the artillery on her hat. So don't know. Could be a wedding picture. Maybe, maybe not. And here is 1714 Capitol Avenue. This is where Bristol Printing was until it was sold in 1928. And obviously sold after Charlie passed because he was the manager at that time. And here is Pioneer Printers at 213 West 18th Street. It's a parking lot today. So we've come full circle. Here's his Army pension card that shows, again, March of 26, given invalid class, and his widow in November of 27 was eligible for his benefits, and it documents that he was in the volunteer cavalry to start with and then transferred to the light artillery. So kind of a sad story. If you know anyone who's struggling, reach out, please. Wyoming has one of the highest per capita suicide rates in the country. A lot of that has to do with this macho, independent, I ain't got no problems lifestyle. I've lost 2 close friends to suicide. So even if you're not in jeopardy yourself, you can call this line or do a text and they will give you advice and suggestions about how to deal with a friend, a neighbor, a family member who may be at risk of suicide. There's also a national suicide hotline, 988. So I got a couple more pictures here. Oh, a fish story. We'll end on a lighter note. Robin found this, and it says, a shovel-nosed shark purporting to have been caught near Seattle more than a year ago was caught again here yesterday. The following inscription was written in waterproof ink. Caught by Charles Bristol of Cheyenne, Wyoming, at Seattle, July 4th, 1923. If caught again, please write. Did they have waterproof ink that would last a year on the belly of a shark? Nice story anyway. So we're good for time. I got some more pictures. Here's that guy, H. Nelson Jackson, at the wheel of his Winton. He was the guy who did the first cross-country trip in an automobile. And though we couldn't find any pictures of the McCabe's, this is John McCabe, Daisy's brother. He was a successful actor on Broadway for many years, and you can kind of see him doing Shakespeare. Let's see, I think that's all the good runs. Oh, this is interesting. This is Tom Horn, escaped from jail in 1903 and was recaptured. And look at all the bicycles. Okay. Do we have any questions? Yes, sir.
Did the Bristols have any children?
They did not.
What was your biggest challenge on doing research on Charles?
It was a big thing and a small thing. The small thing was I spent an inordinate amount of time trying to figure out how he could have served in both the cavalry and the artillery. And I think it was you finding those pension cards that solved that. And it wasn't necessarily a research issue, but I've gotten involved with people. I mean, history is basically people. And I've gotten involved 2 or 3 times with people because I was doing their artifacts in the museum collection. Charles Preston Plummer was one. It's an attorney here in Cheyenne. Edgar Herring was another one. You know, his 45 ACP pistol. He was on the Mexican expedition. He was in World War I and World War II. And I had some affection for Charlie because of our mutual interests and because of his service. But it was really difficult for me to reconcile that with the fact he shot himself in the head, family home, knowing that Daisy would be found. That was a tough thing to digest.
What was Daisy's means of support if she was a widow that long?
She launched a career in journalism.
The journalism
Yep.
did it for her.
She did the weekly columns in the local newspaper. She was the women's page editor of the Wyoming Stock Farmer. I doubt that it was a really lucrative career. They still don't pay journalists anything
And women
these
on top of
days. So I don't know if there was family money involved. I have no idea. But she did. She survived. She lived to be 105. So it was kind of
Those floats for many, many years. For Dan Sullivan.
John.
So where did you find most of your information about Charlie and Daisy? I mean, were you just looking at newspaper stuff? I mean, where did you find your information?
Robin helps me. Material in the archives. And like I said, the errors that were associated with that original collection that was donated in 1968, they didn't have the internet, right? I have access to all this information on the internet that those people didn't have. So some of it came from there. A lot of it is records in the archives, newspaper articles, testimony. There were some papers that came in with the donation about the family, about some of the artifacts that were there.
Did you have any trouble with the records of him going from enlisted to officer?
Did not.
San Francisco?
By the time they left San Francisco, he was a second lieutenant. So I assume there was a captain in charge whose name I don't remember. Most of the people in that artillery battery were from the Cheyenne area, but I don't know the history of promotions.
Did you check with the National Guard, AG's office on that, on these records?
Did not.
Okay,
I know how I got a promotion in the Army.
how'd you get yours?
I did not have a good career in the Army. I let a prisoner escape from a work detail and didn't shoot him.
That's a no-no.
I got busted for beer in the barracks and arrested off post in possession of an illegal. And I was sitting in the orderly room waiting for the shoe to drop. And I heard the company clerk talking to the captain who was the company commander. And he said, "Sir, if you don't give me a clerk typist, we're not going to pass that IG inspection. There's just too much work here. It's not going to happen."
You're lucky there.
So I'd heard he never volunteered. Or, well, I thought maybe this is an exception. So when he came out, I says, "I'm a college graduate. I know the alphabet. I can type 16 words a minute." And the CO, commander, the captain comes out and he says, "Who is that? Who is that? That's a promotion." He saw me and he says, "Green, you ought to be in the stockade. Get in that orderly room. Go to work." So that's how I got my promotion. He was good to his word. He promoted me twice before he left. Anything else? Take time and take a look back there. You can admire my biceps if you like. There's John McCabe's sword on the table, the medals and some charms from Charlie's cross-country bicycle relay race, and a cartridge belt that was used with the 4570s. Almost all the volunteers in the Spanish-American War used, by that point, really the obsolete single-shot black powder trapdoor Springfield, while the regular troops had the 1892 Craig Jorgensen 30-40 caliber. I had to get guns in there.
Yes, you did. Thank you, Evan.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming this evening. Like Evan said, please be sure to check out the stuff from the museum collections in the back. And next month on August 10th, we have Dave Markham, who will share his research on Amelia Earhart. No, she was not found here in Wyoming. And also, please pick up a calendar for upcoming events.
Where was she found?
You gotta come
Thank
to the
you.
presentation.